Y ahora, niños, después de la escuela, a bailar. Pero el tucanazo. ¡Órale! Con este ritmo se mueven todos.
Welcome to another episode of James' Book Club. Today we're reviewing Goodnight Moon, a popular children's tale from clearly sometime before 2000, because that's when I got it. So either I invented it or it was invented before I came into being. It was invented in 1947. This thing's older than both of my parents. Shoot, this thing's older than, like, the Soviet Union.
And the Second World War.
Well, no, the Second World War ended in 1945.
Yeah, 45.
This thing's older than the Cuban Missile Crisis.
This is the 60s.
I knew the answer, I'm just stupid.
You're just stupid. Okay, anyway, we must continue. So, I'm actually, the book is short enough, I'm going to read through it real quick. I don't know how we're going to get this, but we'll just read it through. In the great green room, there was a telephone, and a red balloon, and a picture of the cow jumping over the moon. And there were 3 little bears sitting on chairs. There were, technically, sorry, I'm going to have to restart here, but it was actually started in 1811. But it didn't reach the continental United States until 1812. Although if you also consider the 7 Years' War, it started in 1807. Just a little bit of history knowledge for you. Okay, we're going to restart. We got to be quiet. My audience, we got to be quiet. Okay.
Y ahora, niños, después de la escuela, a bailar. Pero el tucanazo. ¡Órale! Con este ritmo se mueven todos.
Welcome back. It's James' Book Club, everyone. Today we're going to be reviewing Goodnight Moon, a popular children's tale. Started back in 1947. They wanted their kids not to grow up with traumatic Vietnam flashbacks from World War II. So they tried to infect them with these...
Vietnam flashbacks from World War II.
Exactly.
Right.
So they tried to fill their minds with these images of scary rabbits and kittens. Anyway, the book is actually short enough that for once I can read it. So we'll read it first and then I'll go over my multiple topic points about what the book is about. So let us begin. In the great green room there was a telephone, and a red balloon, and a picture of the cow jumping over the moon. And there were 3 little bears sitting on chairs, and 2 little kittens, and a pair of mittens, and a little toy house, and a young mouse, and a comb and a brush, and a bowl full of mush, and a quiet old lady who was whispering hush. Good night, room. Good night, moon. Good night, cow jumping over the moon. Good night, light and the red balloon. Good night, bears and chairs. Good night, kittens and good night, mittens. Good night, clocks and good night, socks. Good night, little house and good night, little mouse. Good night, comb and good night, brush. Good night, nobody, good night, mush. And good night to the old lady whispering hush. Good night, stars and good night, air. Good night, noises everywhere. And thus the book ends. So,
Beautiful.
it truly was beautiful. So let me go over my talking points real quick to summarize. The book is mainly about the main character. It's never named, but I call him the bunny. It's mainly about the bunny's death, in fact, and I have multiple points to prove it. But we'll go through it first, and then I can kind of sort of connect it as we go. So we start off, and if you look at his room, it's dummy thick. And in this economy, there is no room that large for what I can only assume to be is a 3-year-old child. And speaking of dummy thick, his red balloon is also incredibly dummy thick. So next, he talks about this cow that jumps over the moon. Now, as we all know, cows eat hay. I'm like 85% certain. And so clearly he's jumping over the moon to reach his hay. And as we all know, there is always a single needle in a haystack. So therefore, the cow is actually, he's going to jump into the haystack and he's going to land head first into the needle. And he will unfortunately die, so let us get a moment of silence for the cow. So anyway... Fly on. if you speak again, we're gonna shoot you. Anyway, so the cow dies, and this is a reference to the fact that throughout the book, the bunny is also slowly dying. And so he's just realizing his death through the cows jumping over the moon. Next... Oh yeah, so throughout the book, they try to end every rhyme. But often they use the word little, and it always bothers me. I added it as I read, but they should add little right before it to make it rhyme more, just like Stuart Little rhymes with little piece of crap, stuff like that, because that's what Stuart Little is. And then, in the next page, he talks about he has kittens, right? Now, rabbits are animals, and kittens are also animals, so therefore, this is an example of slavery. He is keeping them in the house. Clearly they're doing work. They're, cleaning up his carpet. So therefore, these kittens are actually his slaves. And therefore, this rabbit is a slave owner, and therefore he should be condemned. And that is, in fact, why he's dying. He's being hanged for still owning slaves in the 1940s. Interesting factoid. So then he talks about mush, and I was looking at it and immediately reminded me of public school food. It's got no flavor, no taste, no color. It's pretty much just a bowl of whatever they had in the back room of the house. So probably actually some, what's that thing called? Blended up leaves. Just blended up leaves mixed with like maple sugar to add a little bit of flavor. And then he also says here, and a quiet old lady who was whispering hush. Now, the book never says this is his mother. Nor does it say it's his babysitter. He doesn't know this woman. In fact, this is the woman who's trying to kill him. And she's saying hush because she's trying to keep him from screaming out as she's trying to kill him. She wants him to be quiet so that his death will be silent and that the neighbors will not hear him. So I think that's interesting. And you see, she's even knitting while she's doing it because she doesn't care about this rabbit's life at all. It's a metaphor for our lives where in the grand scheme of things, we don't matter as human beings. And just like this woman, God and the universe will eventually reclaim us to the dark something. Let me see. Oh yeah, so then he says, Goodnight Room, and you can see it takes up the entire page. So it should be more like Goodnight Mansion. This is a mansion in and of itself. The White House is in fact smaller than this. I think Will Smith's house pales in comparison to this single room in his multiple-story abode. And then, of course, he continues to repeat himself like an old man with ADD and Alzheimer's, just doesn't remember what he actually said. So he continues to talk about the Goodnight Moon, Goodnight Horse, Goodnight Red Balloon. Oh yeah, so then here, again, he mentions the 3 bears and 3 chairs, which means that the 3 little bears, they're actually canon in the Goodnight Moon universe. So I'm waiting for the sequel, Goodnight 3 Bears, where they end up killing Goldilocks and saying goodnight to all of her individual body parts that they've made, that they've put into their mush as seasoning, similar to like when you put like a strawberry in cereal commercials. And so then he compares his kittens to his fine dress, like they're his property, again establishing that they are, at the very least this book, his slaves, and that he is a morally reprehensible human being and must be punished, and that in fact the old lady, who we see down here in the corner still trying to shush him so she can kill him quietly, that he is deserving of death from her. So then he's also an example of the bourgeoisie. He in fact owns the house that this mouse lives in, and in fact charges him exuberant prices, which is how he pays for his mansion. So just like the communists did when the Soviet Union got started, we need to overthrow the bourgeoisie, i.e. this bunny, and brutally torture and kill him, which is why we've sent this rabbit here. And then he says, "Goodnight, nobody." Now this reflects the idea that many atheists have, that there's nothing at the end of our life, and that when you die, you just end into this eternal abyss of nothingness that we can't even, as a human species, comprehend. And he's realizing that as he's bleeding out from the 28 stab wounds the shush lady has given him, that there is, at least to him, nothing at the end of the universe, and Therefore, he must accept the fact that they're there and say goodnight to it. And of course, she's still in the corner. Just now, she's shushing him because he's screaming, or attempting to scream because she did stab his vocal cords during the 28 stab wounds. So she's trying to get him to shush while he does that. And then good night, actually, in this book stands for goodbye. And we see it as best example in here because he's saying goodbye to the air. Because as his esophagus and windpipe was stabbed, he has no more need for oxygen as, there's no way to get it in. And then slowly his eyes, cover up and close because he no longer has the ability to open them. So he has no more need to look at the stars. And the last thing, it always bothered me as a child, he says, goodnight noises everywhere. Now, this was always a weird thing to end on because, of course, the name of the book is Goodnight Moon. So I always assumed it was going to end on Goodnight Moon. Now I looked it up. Hearing is the last sense to go. And I thought I was making this up and I was going to have to explain my point. But I'm entirely right for once. Hearing is the last sense to go when you die. And therefore, the book truly is about his death because the last thing he says is goodnight noises because he's run out of the ability to hear because of his death. So this book is in fact not a children's book to bring them enjoyment post World War II and all that stuff. It is in fact a moral of the story of all the children who died during World War II and all the bourgeoisie members that were killed because they took down our great socialist party and tried to keep the workers from working. So I think this is an excellent book about not only our death, but why the Communist Party is in fact correct. And I'll state this right here, I do not actually endorse the Communist Party. This book endorses the Communist Party. And that's why it's no longer sold in stores anywhere. I can't find it even on Amazon. Our Lord and Savior is selling everything in the known universe. But yeah, so Goodnight Moon, rated a hammer and sickle out of bourgeoisie. Definitely would recommend reading if you want a brief look into the into our lives. And yeah, that's Goodnight Moon. I've got nothing more to say. I don't know what I'm reading next time. It's gonna be something probably stupid, knowing me. But yeah, there you go. Bye. That was crap. I hate it. Every second of it. I won't ever get that book out of my sight. I don't want. There we go.
Hoi, ja, dit. Nage tankade, tankashilade, hakisitade, hoi, ja, dit.